Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to week 3 of Reach. Tonight, we're going to be discussing and praying through 2 Corinthians chapter 8, verses 1 to 5. Now, before we get there, as I mentioned on Sunday, I have this recurring experience, often in the fall, when I'm standing in my backyard looking at an ocean of leaves, wondering, where do I start? You know, I believe by faith that there's grass underneath this sea of leaves, but where do I start when it comes to cleaning all this up? And when it comes to Reach, you might be at that point where you're wondering, where do I start? Maybe you're all in on the reality that the Lord is calling us to acquire a long-term facility where we can reach more people, preach the gospel, make disciples of Jesus, and send out new church plants long into the future. Maybe you've really grabbed on to your identity as a steward, that God owns everything and He entrusts us with His property so that we can make an eternal impact with His resources, His time, treasure, and talent entrusted to us. And now you're wondering, okay, but really practically, where do I start? And the answer to that question is the big idea of the passage we're going to be discussing tonight. 2 Corinthians 8, 1 to 5, the big idea is give yourself first to the Lord. And so what I want to do in the next few minutes is very simply walk us through these verses and maybe cue up some of the questions that we're going to be discussing and things we're going to be praying through tonight. So 2 Corinthians 8, beginning in verse 1 says, "We want you to know, brothers." So, reminder, this is the Apostle Paul writing to the church at Corinth. The church at Corinth was a wealthy church in the grand scheme of things. They were very gifted, had a lot going for them. And Paul's writing them, he says, "I want you to know, brothers, about the grace of God that has been given among the churches of Macedonia." Okay, so the churches of Macedonia, these would be churches like the churches in Berea and Thessalonica, and Paul wants the Corinthians to know about the grace of God, the undeserved favor of God that's being experienced by the church, or the churches in Macedonia. Okay, so what is this that they're experiencing? Verse 2, "For in a severe test of affliction, their abundance of joy and their extreme poverty have overflowed in a wealth of generosity on their part." So the Apostle Paul, he's very careful when he talks about money. He doesn't like to use the terms like money and gifts and giving and those kinds of things. Rather, he likes to speak in terms of grace. The Apostle Paul thinks of human generosity as something that flows from the grace of God who gives all things. And he's telling the Corinthian church, I want to inspire you with the generous example of the churches in Macedonia. And he tells them, they didn't give because they have a lot. Rather, he wants to inspire them because they followed this sort of illogical formula when it came to their generosity. It was affliction plus joy plus poverty equaled overflowing generosity on their part. Then Paul goes on in verse 3, "For they gave according to their means, as I can testify, and beyond their means of their own accord." Okay, so he's saying these incredibly generous, impoverished, suffering Christians gave. And they gave, in the context of 2 Corinthians 8 and 9, they're giving to the suffering saints in Jerusalem. They gave according to their means, and Paul says, and actually, then they sort of went beyond that, giving in a way that, from a financial planner perspective, might not be considered the wisest. They gave beyond their own means, but it says, of their own accord. No one had to twist their arm. No one manipulated them. They gave above and beyond their means of their own accord. Paul goes on, "Begging us earnestly for the favor." That word favor there is the same Greek word as grace. "Begging us earnestly for the charis, for the grace of taking part in the relief of the saints." Isn't that interesting? The churches in Macedonia saw generous giving as actually a gift, an opportunity for them. So they begged Paul, could we please take part in this generosity for the saints in Jerusalem? It's likely that Paul saw their poverty and perhaps was like, no, you guys really don't need to give to this collection. They begged Paul, could we have the grace of getting to give. And Paul says, and this was not as we expected, verse 5. This was unexpected giving. This was above and beyond giving. This was not something Paul thought they would do or twisted their arm into. Now, here's the question. What led these Christians in Macedonia toward such joyful, such generous, such above and beyond sort of illogical formula giving? What led them there? Our passage closes this way. And this, not as we expected, but they gave themselves first to the Lord, and then by the will of God to us. In other words, they gave themselves, all of themselves, nothing held back, to the Lord. Because the Lord has given all of himself to us in his life, death, and resurrection on our behalf. They gave themselves completely and totally to the Lord, and that led them to this sort of outrageous generosity that we read about in this passage. And so tonight we're going to discuss things like, who are some Macedonian Christians in your life? Who are some people who have or could inspire you toward more joyful generosity as we continue the Reach initiative? How could we even inspire one another toward greater and greater generosity to the glory of God? We're also going to discuss different things like the different characteristics of the giving that we see on the part of the Macedonians. How might the Lord so work in us that we step into the example that they left us? And we're going to pray toward that end. So have a wonderful time as we begin 2 Corinthians 8 and 9. We're going to be in this passage for the next 4 weeks in these 2 chapters. I hope you so enjoy discussing and experiencing the reality of giving yourself first to the Lord, because that's where we start. We give ourselves first to the Lord, nothing held back, because he held back nothing from us. And then everything else will flow from there. So let's give ourselves first to the Lord tonight.
I'm Liz EACHUS.
And I'm RJ.
We've been going to CityLight for about 3 years.
God is using CityLight to provide just like consistent community amongst a bunch of other changes socially with COVID and just a changing environment over the past few years. We've always had our city group. They've been there to pray for us, to go through life with us, and that's just really been impactful for me personally, and I think I can speak for both of us.
I think one spiritually significant moment in probably both of our lives at CityLight was when we both got baptized. We've been Christians for a while. Before we came to CityLight, we were Christians, but we never did the public declaration of baptism. And coming to CityLight, becoming members, and starting to understand the importance of that public declaration of faith, we were both really encouraged to get baptized and being able to stand up in front of the church and, share our testimony, share how God's worked in our lives, and do that in front of our community here. That was really awesome to be able to experience.
I think CityLight's a good investment of our time, especially just because I feel like more so than our previous community, we've been able to grow and have people encourage us towards growing more Christ-like. So it's been really fun. We're involved in a city group, and recently we've started leading a city group, and just the growth spiritually there has been really awesome for the 2 of us.
I think giving to CityLight is a good investment for us because we just see how gospel-centered CityLight is. That's one thing that we appreciated from the moment we started coming here, that every single sermon, the gospel is preached, and Jesus is shared with people that are there. And so for us, giving our money to CityLight is really important because we just see how God is using CityLight to make himself known in the city. And even when we've been here for only 3 years, we've just heard all the stories of people that have experienced Christ through CityLight, and we just have a lot of trust in the leadership and how God is using them. And I think, we're excited about the future for CityLight, and we're excited about being part of it.
I think in thinking about the Reach initiative, it has us thinking about what ways can we make small sacrifices that can add up to a larger personal commitment for us, and just lead well in doing that and set an example for our city group and just other people we interact with at the church. Just be able to give sacrificially.